What's up, you guys? Would you like to have a better understanding of what your snake might be thinking? Well, stick around because we're talking about snake body language and how to read it. So being able to understand or have at least a reasonable idea of what your snake's feeling is very important. It just makes keeping them so much easier and more enjoyable. So having an idea of what their body language signs are is kind of important. So in this video I'm just going to explain some of those things. I'm going to start off explaining what is a relaxed snake and the signs they show that determine that they're relaxed or not. And then we're going to go more into snakes that may be a bit more frightened or defensive and show you all the various things they do to show how they're feeling. So a snake's body language can be kind of broken down into a few characteristic things that they do and that you can visually see to give away how they're feeling. Obviously body posture is one, how tense their body actually is. The way they flick their tongue, they have different ways they flick their tongue depending on how they feel, even different noises and the volume of the noises they make. All these things can help you figure out how they're feeling. Now I just want to put out there before we go any further, this is not applying to every species of snake or every snake in the hobby. This is just kind of a broad, generalized sort of thing. I realize there are some species of snake that might be different to what I'm explaining in this video. It's just impossible to explain the behavioral characteristics of every species. I'm just kind of generalizing for the majority of what most people will be experiencing with their pet snakes, give or take a couple of random ones here and there that might behave a little different for whatever reason that may be, their individual personality or a particular species I'm just not covering. But again, this is just a kind of general sort of thing. So with snakes that are just kind of relaxed and very content and chilled out, it's pretty obvious and straightforward. Usually they'll be curled up somewhere in their enclosure. Usually they'll have their head resting on their own coils sometimes. They'll be very minimal, if not any, tongue flicking at all. Now this of course can sometimes mean they're just sleeping. It's kind of hard to tell one from the other because snakes don't have eyelids, so they do actually sleep with their eyes open. So they could just be asleep, but if they're not, and that's how they're sitting, they're just content and relaxed. Then when you get to snakes that are more curious and maybe exploring their surroundings, but they're still not stressed or anything, they're just kind of feeling a bit adventurous and they're curious, like my jungle carpet he's doing. His body's not tensed up at all. He's not really focusing on any one particular thing at a time, he's kind of just looking around everywhere. He's flicking his tongue out quite a lot, but it's at a normal rate, I guess you'd say. It's hard to, I guess, put an exact number on how fast he's flicking his tongue because each snake does it a bit different, but I guess when you've been keeping snakes a little while, you kind of get the idea of what I mean when I say he's flicking his tongue at a normal sort of a rate. It's not overly fast, it's not overly slow, it's just at a normal rate. He's kind of just checking out his surroundings, using his tongue to smell everything around him, see what's what. You'll also notice that just when he's moving around and stuff, sometimes he will put his neck into a bit of an S shape. That doesn't mean he's going to strike. A lot of people think that when the snake has its neck in an S shape, it's going to strike and it's agitated. That is true, but only under certain circumstances. I found carpets just generally do like to have their neck in an S shape sometimes, even when they're moving around and they might stop for a second, just to stop and have a look at something real quick before they continue on, they'll S up. It's not that they're being defensive, it just seems to be a posture they like to hold as well. You'll find with other snakes like say womas and blackheads, they don't tend to do it as much, but a lot of your carpets do tend to put their neck in a little bit of an S shape, even if they're not being aggressive. The reason you can tell it's not an aggression or defensive S shape is because even if he does S up, if his body isn't tense and he's not showing various other signs that I'll go through in a minute of aggression, it's fine. Then when you're talking about snakes that are maybe a little bit more on the stressed out side, not defensive yet, but just stressed, like let's say you go into their enclosure and you remove their hide box that they're hiding under and they just don't want to be disturbed and they're a bit agitated. Depending on the species, of course, again, they can do different things. Some snakes might rely on their camouflage and they'll just not move at all. and just rely on camouflage, but they will be flicking their tongue out at a very slow rate. They'll stick their tongue out and kind of hold it out of their mouth and flick it for sometimes a number of seconds before drawing it back in. What they're doing with that is they're trying to gather as many scent particles on it as possible in one go to determine what's going on, because snakes see their world around them mainly through sense of smell. Their eyesight is very much secondary to their sense of smell, so they get a lot of their information as to what's going on around them from smell. On top of doing that, if they're trying to camouflage from you and you keep kind of pushing the matter and getting a bit too close to them, sometimes they might hide their head under their coils. This is another defense mechanism because they don't want to get bitten on the head by a predator, which they think you might be a predator, so they'll hide their head under their coils. I found that with snakes that do stick their tongue out for a length of time before drawing it back in, pythons don't do it so much. Sometimes they do, but I found it's more of a colubrid thing. They'll tend to do that more so. Again, different colubrids may be different, but the ones that I've seen do seem to do it. So sometimes in that situation where they're kind of a little bit stressed, not being aggressive or defensive yet, just a little bit stressed and wondering what's going on around them, they might exhibit slow tongue flicks. Then if you actually go to try and touch them and they know they've been spotted by you, then they may change into a defensive sort of behavior. So a snake in a defensive behavior, again, is going to be behaving a little different. Again, sometimes if it's a colubrid, they'll still be doing those slow tongue flicks. Pythons sometimes do it, but they more or less do very fast, rapid tongue flicks. Their whole body's going to tense up. They're going to be breathing in and out very heavily. A lot of your carpet pythons and various colubrids also will have their neck in an S shape, focused on your eyes or on your hand or whatever it is that's, I guess, irritating them. If it's your hand, they're just going to be focused in on that, and they're not going to lose eye contact with whatever it is that's irritating them. They're going to have their neck S up, very tense. They're going to maybe flatten out their neck, depending again what they are. Some colubrids will flatten their neck out and puff it up, depending what they are. It makes them look a little bit bigger. They're trying to look as big and as intimidating as possible. Some snakes will actually puff up their body as well, or flatten their body. Again, to make themselves look bigger and more intimidating. Some snakes will actually rattle their tail as well. It's thought they're mimicking a rattlesnake doing this, or sometimes it could just be drawing attention away from their head by making a rattling noise with their tail down the other end of their body. And let's say the snake's doing all these things and you're still kind of trying to pick it up or annoy it. It has a few options depending on what it is sometimes, what species. They all do different, but it'll either strike and stand and fight and strike at you until you go away, or it might play dead, or it might try to run. This can vary depending on what it is. Like if something like Monty, my big coastal carpet, he's quite big and heavy, he's not going to be running anywhere. He's way too slow. So if he were to get defensive, I'd say he'd just hold his ground and strike. But something a bit smaller like my eastern brown tree snake will probably run because it's much smaller and lightweight. It's a quick snake naturally, so it can take off quite quickly. And then there's other species that do play dead as well. From what I know, hognose snakes will play dead if they're stressed out enough. What I've found with a lot of my defensive snakes is they're only defensive when you first go and interact with them in their enclosure, because the first thing that pops into their head when you disturb them is they think you're a predator, so they're going to be defensive. If you can just reach in and pick them up in one swift movement, once you get them out, they're usually okay because they realize, hang on, if this was a predator, it'd be eating me by now, but it's not, so I'm okay. And then they usually calm down and they revert back into that more curious, exploratory sort of state of mind where they're just wandering around, kind of curious about everything that's around them. And they've just lost that defensiveness. The problem is, it's when you reach in the enclosure to get your snake and it shows defensive postures, you reach in and pull back, and then you reach in and pull back. To a snake, that's like a predator constantly picking at it and fighting with it, trying to attack. It's better to just reach in, pull them out, and then they're all good usually. And if you are worried about getting bitten, if that does phase you, and hence why it makes you pull back all the time and you just don't have the nerve to pick them up, get a snake hook and use a snake hook. And usually once you've got them out, they're much calmer. You can see they're calmer, then you can use your hands. And lastly, the other, I guess, more common thing with snake behavior and body language is food responses. Most snakes, if not all snakes, do have some sort of a feeding response, a lot of which can be quite aggressive at times, and it can be kind of intimidating for some people to deal with. Recognizing it is honestly not difficult. Usually with most of my snakes that are food aggressive, all I have to do is just be near the tank moving around, and within seconds they're up at the front of the glass. They often have their face pressed up against the glass, or their whole body's leaning against the front door. If I was to reach to open the door or move my hands around near the front, their head would be following my hands while pressed against the glass. Snakes that are in a bit of a feeding response almost look like they're on a bit of a mission to find something. They're very focused on where's the food, and it's usually your hand they associate with food, or you, because you are the one who's going to be feeding them, so they do associate you with getting food sometimes. Now, it is kind of important to be careful when snakes are in this kind of state of mind, because they can accidentally bite you out of excitement of just getting fed. However, sometimes I have some snakes, my Woma python being one of them especially, who is just always in an aggressive feeding response, even when there's no food or no smell of any food present. He's always like that. It's kind of a Woma python thing sometimes, I think. I've heard a lot of people with similar Womas to mine behaving this way. If I'm holding him, he's just in a feeding response all the time, even if I've taken him out and I'm holding him. And a lot of the ways you can tell that he's about to give you a feeding bite is he'll have his nose kind of pressed up against my skin. Like, he'll really be smelling my skin with a lot of intent. And he'll be flicking his tongue quite quickly against my skin. So a lot of the time, if you're holding your snake and you find they've got their nose or maybe the front side of their mouth pressing against your skin and they're kind of rubbing it on your skin, and they're also maybe really flicking their tongue quite fast, touching your skin with it, there is a chance they might just open their mouth and grab on. Because that's them, again, in a feeding response while being curious. They're checking your skin out to determine whether it's food or not, but if it's a snake like my Woma that just has food on mind all the time, they kind of trick themselves into thinking that you're food and they just grab you anyway. Anyways guys, that's basically my little video on snake body language. Hope it was helpful to some of you. Hope it makes snake keeping a little easier for you beginners out there. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like. My Instagram's down below if you want to follow me there as well. I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.